G'day, friends. Maloa here. Today we are coming to you to talk to you about the Blue Mariner. I have had so many requests over the past year since I posted the first one about the Blue Mariner, all its intricacies, and today I've got Sape with me, and we are going to be showing you the ins and the outs of how to be an amazing Blue Mariner. I've been playing Blue Mariner in Endgame ever since it came out. It is my personal favorite class in the game, and I am super excited to be able to share that with all of y'all today. Sape, welcome.
Hey, so I have played Mariner, both red and blue, and I'd say is like my seventh or eighth priority character, now even lower. For ever since even before like as soon as it was released, and I really enjoy red, really good at both, and know pretty much everything about both specs. I don't enjoy playing blue, to be honest, and that's largely why Maloa is going to be more active, you know, participant in this guide than other class guides that we've hosted, excluding, of course, our blue mini one. But yeah, I feel like it's an incredibly misunderstood class as far as, or spec rather, as far as just how much utility in a variety of ways you can bring in addition to personal damage if you know the small details and how to really optimize everything that's available to you rather than just use your big skills, your debuffs, and you know your really simple but very potent damage rotation for personal damage. So we're going to be covering more of the utility and the like the nitty-gritty nuance details of how to separate yourself from the vast majority of blue mariners and truly be, exceptional at all of the various things that it can do in this video. So we're going to start with traits like usual. So you have some options. In blue, there are not too many options really available to you. You really the only variation that you can change as far as for group content in the blue line as here is losing a point in hardening songs and 2 points in shrug side blows for 3 points into the south wind for fights where like make haste is not necessarily enough or you don't have a captain and you want to maximize group speed as well as your own personal speed, which is a subject that I'll be getting into later on in the video. But in red, you have, once again, not too many options. I choose to lose 1 point in lean forward, which is 2% less force state buff damage. 1 point in natural explorer in yellow, which is 3k vitality, which with all of the various modifiers to morale actually comes to like 16k morale for just 1 point and well 2 points. But and since you're only in force state 75 to at most 85% of the time, this is actually more like a 1.5% DPS loss. But if you're going glass cannon, then obviously, you know, max that out. You definitely want to spec into dodge. We will be getting into all of its utility and importance later. And if you are in a fight where and with a group where you can safely stand in front of the mob, like there's no frontal, and also be within 5 meters of everyone for especially dramatic flourishes, crit chance buff, being having only a 5 meter radius, then it's actually more beneficial to spec out of like lose if you can afford it natural explorer and lose 4 points in lean forward for 5 points in a duelist honor because the plus 7.5 positional damage applies in all states and to all skills. And then if you still want to keep Natural Explorer, then lose 4 points and lean forward, and then 1 more point in swordplay damage, because swordplay skills, while they are the majority of your damage, you have a variety of skills that are not swordplay, and positional damage, if you are able to stay in front of an enemy, applies to all of your damage.
Now,
So
Sape, sorry, can you talk a little bit about, are we going to get into later about standing in front of the boss?
yeah, as long as you know that there are no frontals and there are no punts from being in front and etc., then it's best to stay in front of the boss, but only if the group is tightly stacked within
Okay.
5 meters of you.
And only
Um,
have that trait selected?
yes.
Okay.
And also you can, because you have so many defensive skills that are so potent, especially like, even if it is a fight against the boss that has frontals, if you know when those frontals are coming, you can actually use your defensive skills in a specific sequence where you will have 100% physical avoidance to
And we'll talk about that in a
physical
little bit.
damage. And so you can also help with like distributed frontal damage a whole lot more, that like where the tank won't have to take all of it, and you can avoid huge amounts or all of it and decrease the damage the tank takes from, you know, distributed hits that, if only one person is receiving damage, are normally, pretty substantial. But keep in mind, you have a lot of buffs to the group that are that require you to be like close to them. Like you should actually, as a Blue Mariner, be the center of the group besides the tank, and sometimes with the tank. In fights where everyone can stand together, and there are a few of those, then basically everyone should be centered around you. Um, and we'll get more into why that is in a little while. So you definitely want to spec into everything here, and in some fights where, like, take boss 3 of DMK, where you're not really taking hardly any damage, but where run speed really matters, especially for the group, you know, Southwind. Southwind is also Shanty, which is, heals over time. And so that's pretty much it for traits in blue. There aren't too many options. You can also lose step aside or blows, shrug aside blows rather, and lose the step back damage reduction if you're not planning on using step back for that purpose. And you can put that into the enhardening songs, or if you really want to increase speed more, then firm footing. Like you can literally get up to, with 5 points in firm footing, 3 in Southwind, and then using it in the proper sequence of defensive skills, 100% run speed. Like you have you're the fastest in combat, especially class in the game. So that's pretty much it for blue, because nothing else is really negotiable. And yeah, so let's move on to allies, which are also pretty straightforward for the most part. It really the one thing about Blue Mariner allies is they are largely dependent on the content that you're doing and the quality of your gear, like what you should use in a lot of slots. I am in a tier 3 build right now, as you see. Got tier 3 levels of crit, obviously, or of finesse, and obviously crit and mastery are capped. And then my mitigations are about as high as they can get without me having another Kenta piece. And like as I said, this is not one of my top priority tunes, so it's not totally min maxed. But it, in order to still be able to, do hardest content in the game, I use heraldry of the sturdy sparrow, or the plus 1.5%, or whoops, plus 1.5% physical mitigation, and then 2 gram willpower is both for the tactical mitigation and the plus 1.5% tactical mitigation. But also with the sturdy sparrow, even though you're sacrificing agility and physical mastery as opposed to keen serpent, for instance, you get a lot more vitality. And Mariner has so few self heals, so few heals in general, that increasing your morale is is more important than for most DPS classes. Because if you're super squishy, you're going to have to rely on your defensive skills a whole lot more and sacrifice DPS. And if the fight that you're in has damage to the group that is unpredictable, then that can be quite difficult, especially if you are not able to, like, if you don't have available to you dodge, especially. But if you're, you know, if you don't know the sequences that you should use your defensive skills in, and if you're not using the defensive swordplay buff durations tracery, which most people don't, but and I don't in most fights either. However, it is an option, and moving along with that.
Can you show that one for us? The
Yep.
defensive one.
I had a gold one. I wore it for a long time. I don't know where it went. I must have disenchanted it by accident. But yeah, defensive sword play buff durations +3, meaning seconds, to the length of, for instance, blade shield, 7 seconds for 25% parry chance, and 10 seconds for plus 15% setback damage reduction and eye post damage. So that goes with the gold tracery, which increases by 4 seconds to 11 and 14. You know, disengage, which is you have to spec into dodge in order to be able to use disengage. It actually is a finisher, by the way, and we'll expand on how important this skill can be later.
Yeah,
But
coming back
it,
to the topic of having more morale, it's especially important in the Mariner because the you're wearing medium armor, but you're a melee class. So it makes it a little bit more challenging for you to be able to withstand hits. So that's why another reason to focus on the sparrow for the vitality, so you can increase that buffer zone even more.
in addition to that, especially for blue, the raid gear stats are very poor. Like, you cannot amass a huge amount of
Mitigations.
stats mitigation and still
Hmm.
hit without sacrificing damage. It's one of the like, they designed it to where you have to rely on your defensive skills, um, largely, unless you're in a group that is properly chaining group defensive skills regularly, or the healer is going to have to focus on you a lot, and you may be one-shotted like very easily too. Speaking of that, well, you have, especially if you're wearing 6 set gear, and in most fights, of course, I don't. You should be wearing 4 set, and
4-2, right?
actually,
4 blue, 2
4 set
red.
blue, 2 red. Yes, because if you are not depending on Guided by the Stars to be the most powerful defensive group buff in the game, which the 6 set makes it into, by causing for its whole duration for everyone to only take 70% damage in addition to all of the other benefits. And having two red pieces gives a 10% finisher damage. And the red pieces have better stats in general than the blue ones do. For your allies, if you are not doing tier 3 content or like DMK tier 5, then in general you are probably going to want to maximize damage over survivability. And in that case, you will probably want to use 2 heraldry of the keen serpents. And in that way, you'll be able to amass more total stats, sacrificing physical mitigation as well as vitality. You'll have more agility, more physical mastery, and more when you combine it with heroic precision, the force set, like 5k more crit. So in that way, you'll be able to boost your mitigations. But as I was speaking and talking about before, the importance of morale for you is so critical that in general, you want to, for the hardest content at least, sacrifice using, for instance, Word of Craft tactics, even though a huge percentage of your damage is, or should be at least, damage over time. Like all of your bleeds, all bleeds, if you are not aware, all bleeds, all damage over time effects in this game for all classes, physical or tactical, are tactical damage. So Ambari Word of Craft Tactics, having a gold and a teal one, will increase your DPS by, it's less than 1%, but still, like, that's the way to go to, instead of 2 gram willpowers if you're just, like, going glass cannon. As far as your Word of Powers go, always single target attack damage and single target attack crit, and for, if you only have one, like, one set of allies and no swappies for situations, then damage over time and damage over time crits, and then AoE damage. Even though you have a good amount of AoE, you have even more damage over time. But if you do have the resources or just want to make, for instance, build for optimizing AoE damage, and especially in, big like raid trash pools, for instance, then you can lose the damage over time and damage over time criticals for area effect attack criticals, and if you really want, area of effect target count. So, like, those are swappy options. As for your word of mastery, words of mastery, Mariner has the fewest of any class, strangely enough. And frankly, 11 of them are pretty much non-negotiable. And there are a few exceptions where, for instance, if you are going into a fight where there is, like, to where you're not going, there are no corruptions, and you really want to use a tracery reclamation scroll and remove finisher skills, reset salt cure for instance, defensive swordplay buff durations or shanty skills healing or toss a bottle healing cooldown or bottle healing, etc. Anyway, that's min-maxing discussion. Really, you want recenter cooldown for skills damage, swordplay finisher damage, fire thrust damage, always. And then when skills cooldown, definitely, because your west wind and your banner, as well as north wind, and those are all wind shanties, as is both these, by the way. Pot skills cooldown, you want fire pots damage, and for fire pots damage over time effect to be active as much as possible. So while that one's not absolutely essential, like I said, there aren't any options as far as where masteries go for Mariner, so it's pretty much always included. Star Guidance duration, pretty much the same thing. It increases the duration of Guided by the Stars, obviously, from 25 seconds to 30 with the gold version to 30.5, which is, very significant, especially if you're wearing the six and, you have the most powerful defensive skill in the game, which, by the way, wind skills cooldown also applies to that. And then Salt Sea Blade debuff duration, absolutely vital. You want, before I show that actually, you may also, in those fights where speed is absolutely necessary and necessary component of, but survivability is not a concern. I think Umshar, DMK final boss. Um, you may want to consider putting in 2 Warcraft hastes for 5% more in combat run speed. So yeah, to get into first why Salt Sea Blade buff duration is so critical. It is your mitigation shred, and it having that tracery, the gold version, increases its duration from 10 seconds to 15.5. And not only does that mean that you don't have to use it as frequently, but that means that with its cooldown of only 7 seconds, you can use it, you can like afford to use it twice in before the mitigation shred goes away, or if you're not able to, then the mitigation shred is still going to stay up much longer, and you're not going to have to weave that in necessarily, especially if you're on the move a lot in fights. You're also going to be able to utilize this and keep up if there are like 2 priority targets, like 2 bosses that you are, both need to be taken down, then you can alternate and keep up mitigation shred on both of them in this way with that tracery. Okay, so that pretty much covers allies.
So the next thing we want to talk about is about the attunement that the mariners have. There is forward attunement that makes your bar there go into the red, and there is aft attunement that makes it go in towards the blue. Now, your what's going to contribute to whether or not you're going in the fore or the aft is your sword play skills. Now, your sword play skills, as shown in this chart, these are all of them, and there's sequences for them. Each of these will affect another skill. So, for example, can you hover over your thrust, please? Or I can. So, if you're on your thrust, right, your thrust is going to affect your aggressive strike and your advance. So, we go thrust and we look at advance. That's how it modifies it. So, what this graph is showing you is the skills that each of the skills modifies, and each of them have different sizes of attunement that they're going to have. So thrust is going to have 1 forward pip, advance is going to have 3, dramatic flourish, which is your finisher, is going to have 5. And all of those are going to build up your your 4 attunement, which is into the red. The reason this is important is because once you get to maximum attunement, if you don't cash it out, it's going to stun you for a couple of seconds, which it can happen at an extremely bad point in the fight. You're losing damage, you're not contributing to the defenses of your team, and so it's a really bad thing if you end up getting stunned. And we'll talk a little bit when we talk about swordplay skills about how will you mitigate that, but just know that you will end up cashing out with recenter after you use a finisher, whether that's a forward finisher or an aft finisher. Once you cash it out with recenter, you reset back to neutral, and then it starts all off. So what makes the Mariner really fun to play for me is the fact that not only do you need to be monitoring your skills and what's happening in the fight, you on top of all of that, you have to manage your balance, your forward and your afterward attunement in order to be able to be a very successful at what you're doing. Now, what's important to also note with that one caveat is that if you use of your other skills that aren't sword play skills, you will not affect the chain. You will not affect your pips. So you can use, for example, salty the mitigation, salty blade, right? You should use that on to keep it up 100% of the time. And that, for example, won't affect your pip statement, but it also won't affect how these skills are built one on top of each other. Sape, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes. So your sequences, how skills affect other skills that are used after them vary in as far as like you have the choice in most cases. For instance, with a sweeping advance, you can do plus 50% fissures damage. So you can apply that to dramatic flourish or thrust, and thrust does more damage, but a sweeping advance also gives dramatic flourish 10% crit chance. You can literally weave in a huge variety of any skill that is not swordplay, meaning like anything that's not compound attack lunge, advance, aggressive strike, riposte, a dramatic flourish, lunge. As long as as long as you're not using one of those skills in between a combination of two others that affect one another, then the effect will still persist generally for 10 seconds. Yeah, for 10 seconds across the board. Marked foes also is a swordplay, by the way. And so you can, for 10 seconds, still get the effect of the previous swordplay skill that you used and weave in other types, shanties, haversack, just melee, normal skills, utility, heals, whatever. It's not like in order to get, for instance, the 30% advanced damage and advanced supplies of bleed from thrust that you have to go thrust in directly into sweeping advance. You can use in between fire pod and Gaia by the stars, whatever. You get the point. As long as you do it within 10 seconds. And you don't use another swordplay skill in between, then you'll still be 30% advance damage and the bleed that thrust into sweeping advance applies. And this also applies to defensive sequences because defensive skills also affect mostly one another, but in some cases offensive skills as well. Like dodge, not only does it give plus 25% evade chance and allow disengage to be used, which is one of your most powerful skills for a variety of purposes. But you must use dodge in order to unlock it, and it's a finisher, by the way. And we'll get to the importance of that in shortly. But for instance, on guard is also a swordplay skill. That it's not a defensive, even though it increases blade shield's parry chance by 50%, bringing it up to 75%. Um, and so you go dodge, on guard, blade shield, and you've got a 100% chance to avoid physical damage, period, as long as you're facing the target, or like for the duration, so at least 5 seconds. And then on guard also for like on guard you should start the fight running in with it increases run speed, but most importantly gives for 15 seconds 3% melee crit chance. You can only use it while in steady balance, so and then it also, as long as you use thrust, as long as you don't use another swordplay skill in between it and thrust, then it doubles thrust damage. So it also increases blade shield's parry chance like that. But blade shield, uh, if you are spec'd into 3 points into shrug aside blows, then then setback will naturally have, in addition to the plus 25% partial evade chance, 10% mitigation and 10% decreased incoming damage naturally. And if you use blade shield before it, getting rid of these tooltips, then that becomes 25%. And then you add in disengage is for 12 seconds, 10% mitigations, which is not the same as incoming damage reduction. It's even more potent uh, because of the nature of how stacking or increasing mitigations has the inverse of diminishing returns. See the stats video that we made for more information about that. But as I said before, you have to use dodge in order to unlock disengage, but you don't have to necessarily use them in a row because you can use dodge, step back, and then I have to have more outputs. Hold up. So step back will also apply a heal from disengage. Why is it not working?
I was having a similar problem earlier. There you go.
Okay, yeah, there.
You have to be far
Yeah, that's
enough aft
changed.
for it to really be
Right.
able. It's like right on the
Okay, so
borderline there.
there. Okay, there. You saw a big 32k morale heal, 33, and then heal over time. All right. And disengage is not only because dodge increases disengage run speed from 30 to 50 for 7 seconds, but once you use disengage, you get a 15-second 10% damage buff, and the raid gets 4% for 10 seconds, and it enables the use of recenter. So if you ever are really in trouble and about to fall off and you want to recenter, and recenter is available but your other finishers aren't, and you want to bring yourself back to say balance, then dodge to disengage is your best friend. But dodge also, like it's more frequently used, especially once you master the rotation, so to speak, of your offensive skills. It's much more frequently used for its effect on riposte. While Blade Shield into riposte will increase riposte damage by 50%. So there, yeah. So pretty big buff, right? Dodge will do the same and give it a plus 50% crit chance, making the combination of dodge into riposte incredibly powerful. And whenever you like all of your other skills on cooldown and you have all your debuffs up and you have nothing else to do, dodge into riposte. Another benefit to this, and using this combo, is that dodge gives 3 AF pips, and riposte gives 2 4 pips, but that nets in you being taken down 1. And I'm going to actually go more into balance and how to most efficiently stay in extreme force state as much as possible without getting what's called steady forward, the self stun from being in it too long. So you want to always have steady aft toggles, especially in groups, because your crit chance will be increased by various buffs and debuffs to the enemies, and whenever you're in AoE situations, you will get more crits, obviously, and every crit gives you 1 4 pip. So it's not the same as just parsing like real content. You will There's a lot more RNG component, and you will go extremely far for a lot faster. So steady helps to keep that in check some, but it's not enough.
Can
You
you
need
then
to. Mm,
Yeah, can you demonstrate to them what it looks like when you get stunned?
okay.
I think that that would be useful for
You
them
can
to see.
actually like it basically never happens, but you can actually get stunned from being too far aft as
Aft
well.
as well. Hmm.
Yeah,
So this is now without doing any mitigations, okay? This is just going all out damage.
I mean, I'm not trying to do anything except get stunned here. There.
There we
Okay.
go.
So for 2 seconds, you can't do anything. Afterwards, it resets you back to the
Neutral,
state like
but you
neutral.
also, what's important to note is that it also removes your aftward skill. So you have to toggle your aftward skill back on if you get stunned, which is really annoying, but that's how it is.
And if you do get stunned, though, you can
Break out of it.
if you have it available,
Hmm.
you can use sea legs, but it has a little bit of an animation. You can also, and on you have a period of a grace period if you're properly traded to be able to stay in that state for a while. But if you don't have available to you a finisher to be able to use recenter and you don't want to go dodge, disengage, recenter, you want to stay close to extremely four. Did you see what I just did? I used motivating song and step back, and that gave a total of 7 aft attunement, which was enough to bring me back into just normal 4. And then I can get back, and the grace period is reset. That's the fastest way to do it because motivating song has a very fast animation, and setback has the fastest, second fastest animation, and attunes 4 aft. Another way is to use West Wind and Banner, and both these actually has 4 pips. But Guided by the Stars, and obviously there's dodge into disengage, which will bring you right out of it and allow you to use recenter. You have Glee,
Reset.
and you're
Now,
safe.
the other important thing is you do need to know what all your options are like that, but you also have to be careful and you have to understand the fight that you're in. Like for example, yes, Guided by Stars can bring you 5 pips backwards,
That's not
but
what you should for.
exactly, that's what you should be using it for, right? It's a defensive skill, so you need to play to the mechanics that you're dealing with that. Same thing with a couple of the
But
other skills, right? You're not just going to throw oathies at any time. So you have to understand the mechanics of the fight, where you are in the fight, what's coming up, what do you need to be saving, and then based off
don't
of all that analysis, decide which of your aft skills to use.
Yes, don't use them for that purpose, but be aware that they have that effect. To be safe, it's generally best in real fights, especially, to recenter after every lunge, after every finisher sequence. And let's see, what else is there about?
I think that that's a
Oh,
good transition to maybe start talking about the damage rotation.
okay. All right. So it's very, very simple. As always, you want to keep up your mitigation shred, and you should probably have a tracker. I don't. I could make one very easily, but I don't feel like I need to in order to always keep up Alt C blade. But never let that fall off. That's if you're starting a fight in melee, that's the first skill you use. Second is North Wind for crit defense debuff, as well as the plus 5% damage buff to the group. And then Marked Foes for the AoE, which does not stack with Captain's Telling Mark, by the way, plus 5% incoming damage for 20 seconds. Deech's thrust into sweeping advance is like seriously 35 to 40% of your damage. It accounts for more of your personal damage than your finisher sequences do. Like your rotation revolves primarily around never missing, and has a 4-second cooldown, never missing a thrust into sweeping advance. Like, always refresh things early. Even delay your finisher sequences if you have to, in order to never miss that. And because attacker's advantage is the bleed that comes from thrust into sweeping advance, and you see, I just did 5, and you see how much damage it's all accounts for. And that's without, mid treads and buffs and everything going. So that is your biggest focus, the cooldown of this, and always having thrust used before it, because the bleed is almost as potent as the skill itself. Secondarily, you want to, of course, prioritize your finisher sequence, but in a very specific way, and you want to make sure that you have your mid tread, but you want to use Northwind on cooldown. You want to make sure that you have marked foes incoming damage debuff up at all times, and that's 20 seconds. Much like Salt Sea Blade, you can use both of them twice before their debuffs will fall off. And in AoE situations, using marked foes twice is a good idea. And single target Salt Sea Blade, if you can fit it in, which you should be able to. Blue Mariner rotation is super easy. Then it's still a good idea because it does a decent amount of single target damage. So as long as those are up, and fire is ideally ticking in the dot from it, which lasts 26 seconds and has a cooldown of 34.5. You want to try to time as many of your finishers and like the buff that you get from Dramatic Flourish, for instance, of plus 25% crit chance to not just you, but everyone after you use it for 3 seconds, as well as the 10-second plus 4% damage buff that Thrust provides. You want ideally to have a very simple, or at least relatively simple, damage rotation with relatively few skills that you utilize to actually do damage. And just a few of them are responsible, if used in the proper sequence, or in the proper combination, more accurately, to account for the vast majority of your damage. You, of course, are a DPS support class, so you are not going to be doing as much damage as pure DPS classes, but you should be doing about 2/3 as much as most pure DPS classes, and you are obviously buffing the raids and the group's damage immensely, including your opener. It's the most complicated aspect of your damage prioritization and rotation, so to speak, at the very beginning. It's the only time that you do not have steady AF toggled on. And you want to toggle it on and keep it toggled on after the first recenter. You start out with On Guard, Dodge, and to disengage, Northwind, Salt Sea Blade, Marked Foes, going slowly here. And depending on how long before you want to actually use both these, if you want to like use it exactly 8 seconds in, and you are and you are the only DPS support, meaning you don't have a red captain whose Bothies will be used first before your Bothies in almost all situations. Then you want to, after marked foes, either use Firepot or just use Thrust before Salt Sea Blade in between Northwind and Salt Sea Blade, because Northwind is AoE, so is marked foes, and Firepot has a bit of an animation that will delay the sequence another second or so. You can also use sweeping thrust into sweeping advance before using your big skills, but you need to get into 4 state. And consider that when you use your big skills after that initial sequence of on guard, dodge, disengage, on guard for the crit chance buff, and dodge to enable disengage for the damage and mitigation buffs, and then Northwind for the primarily the effect applied to the entire raid, plus 5% damage, and it's AoE, max target 7, and you can use it from range 30 meters out. Only hits within a 5-meter radius of your target though, but also it applies plus 5% attack duration and minus 5% crit defense if you are rated into 3 points into the Frigid Northwind, which you should be. That debuff only lasts 25 seconds, and with the proper tracery and skills cooldown, gold version, and the cooldown of Northwind is 44 seconds, so you won't always have the crit defense debuff as well as the attack duration debuff up from it, but especially considering that lunge, every time you use it, it reduces your shanty cooldowns by 3 seconds. That actually you'll be able to use, you know, two lunges in between, and so that cooldown will actually be 38 seconds. So that you'll have it up, you know, the vast majority of the time. And the damage to buff to the entire raid from it, and this is why you want to use it first, is plus 5% and lasts a minute and 10 seconds, which is not only longer than the cooldown, but is also longer than a Red Captain's version of it. So especially in a raid, you want to apply that because Red Captains have a whole lot more skills in their sequence and a whole lot more bleeds, and it's a much more difficult class to play optimally. And they have a skill that if they use upon a defeat response does the same thing. It applies to the raid plus 5% damage, but like making their job easier by not making them have to apply that is a good idea, and you want that obviously as quickly as possible. Salt Sea Blade, because it is your mitigation debuff, 3% of both types. It is also a single target attack, and if you are trying to get to your burn phase as quickly as possible, then you can throw in a thrust before it because it's the only skill before you're going to throw, if you're doing it as quickly as possible. The West Wind, Call of War, and Bothies that will get you enough pips with a thrust, the one from a thrust, that will be boosted by thrusts plus 10% damage. It's single target, so you might as well use it and thrust in between those two. Anyway, that will, in addition to doing single target damage, if you have the tracery that increases its duration of the mitigation debuffs by 5.5 seconds, then you can actually apply this to 2 targets, or you just use it on 1 target twice, like before the mitigation debuff expires. But you should always use it before the mitigation buff expires, or debuff expires rather. And I'll explain the best way generally to sync that up later. The same thing goes with marked foes, and especially upon the release of this video, the expansion should be coming out, and at level 154 set bonuses will become obsolete, so the 4 set bonus that decreases the cooldown of marked foes by 7 seconds will no longer apply, meaning its cooldown will be 15 seconds and you won't be able to use it twice, but you still will be, before the primary effect that you're using it for, the AoE plus 5% incoming damage debuff expires on the up to 7 targets in a 5-meter range of radius that it hits. So anyway, After you establish those three, then if you are trying to get into immediately into both these as quickly as possible, then as I said, thrust before salt sea blade. If not, and if you're delaying it, and it's just a second or so, but you can throw in after those a thrust into sweeping advance, which is the vast majority of your damage. Like, you should watch this cooldown very, very, very carefully, and always proceed it with a thrust, and always toggle it before it's off cooldown. Like, there are so few situations where you should actually leave it off cooldown. Really, the only one that I can think of is if you're going through a finisher sequence, not a finisher, defensive sequence, or like throwing down West Wind banners and both these in a row, and then you know it you won't get it right off cooldown. But and in your finisher sequence as well. But in general, like, your priority, literally, just thrust into sweeping advance will do so much damage from attacker's advantage, the bleed that doing that combo does, as well as sweeping advance's damage is buffed by 30% to by thrust, and thrust damage itself. That alone should account for at least 30%, closer to 40% of your total damage if you're optimizing your rotation, single target at least. And okay, so if you want to wait about 10 seconds before both these, then you start out in neutral attunement and on guard, dodge, disengage. Oh, the dummy went away. Okay, so you saw I threw thrust before North Wind there. It doesn't matter because, like, as we said in the sequencing session portion of the video, Northland is a shanty, and as long as you don't use another swordplay skill, then, or a single target one, then 10% damage buff will still apply to Salt Sea Blade. Anyway, so you're going to go, and obviously these are not going to be on off cooldown for a little while, but if you want to delay it, both these phase, then you want to go thrust sweeping advance before West Wind, Call the Banners of War, both these, and then it will be sweeping advance will be back up, be thrust and sweeping advance again, and then you used your first finisher sequence, which looks like this, and then you toggle steady aft. Okay, so what I just did there is, like, after I've got my debuffs and buffs up, and my big buffs, my big group, long cooldowns, and my enormous incoming damage debuff. Then I used thrust into sweeping advance, and sweeping advance has the effect of increasing finisher skills damage by 50%, in addition to, if you use it before, dramatic flourish. Dramatic flourish applies to the raid within 5 meters of you, and this is one of the reasons that this is one of the skills that is among the biggest reasons why in general, unless the mechanics of the fight demand otherwise, everyone should stack as tightly as possible on you. Or just like everyone should stack, excluding the tank, obviously, because of this 25% crit chance buff for only 3 seconds, but it applies to only people within 5 meters of you. And if you use Dramatic Flourish before it, then you get it's 35% crit. Okay, and so you want to follow that with another thrust to both get the damage buff, the 10% damage to yourself from Dramatic Flourish, and the 4% it applies to the raid, as well as the 25 or 35 rather percent crit chance into another thrust. But another thrust into increasing the damage compound attack by 10%. And in order to use lunge next and have dramatic flourishes 35% crit chance buff apply to lunge as well, your biggest hitting skill, which you obviously want it to do, you have to animation cancel compound attack by double tapping flick. Or else, if you just go, if flick is not available, and because you're only going to be able to sequence like this, the first two finisher sequences, like they will line up, and then about every fourth after that, if flick is not available because lunge has a 15-second cooldown and dramatic flourish has a 20-second cooldown, so they don't synchronize except for at the beginning, and then, like I said, every fourth or so. Then forget about the thrust after dramatic flourish. Just go thrust, sweeping advance, dramatic flourish, compound attack, lunge, and recenter if there's no flick available. But you should see whenever they're going to line up in cooldowns and save your flick for that. Otherwise, you want to use it to animation cancel Firepot and put it back on cooldown as quickly as possible. And that is after you do that first finisher sequence. So the whole thing up to this point is on guard, dodge, disengage. Okay, and after the recenter, which you should always align with dodge, or lunge rather. I don't know why I said dodge. Always, because the cooldowns basically line up. Like after every lunge, recenter. Then toggle steady aft and keep it toggled. Retoggle it if you need to. At that point, you probably want to reapply Salt Sea Blade because especially if you don't have a timer for it, like the duration of the debuff, and you're practicing and not able to utilize it on cooldown yet and still optimize your rotation, then it has, the mitigation debuffs, mitigation shreds last 15.5 seconds, so you'll always have it up if you use it after lunge recenter. But so toggle steady aft and then reapply that and then apply fire pot. And actually, before like fire pot, you want to probably, as I said, the priority thrust and sweeping advance. Then finally, fire and flick will not be available to cancel fire pot. But still, fire pot does a significant amount of damage and should pretty much be used on cooldown. And after that, you want to make sure that you keep, obviously, the marked foes incoming damage buff up, and then just use what's available to you as far as like thrust into aggressive strike pretty much on cooldown. It does a good amount of damage, and you don't have that many damage skills. And then another one, whenever you have everything else is on cooldown, as you see, dodge affects riposte by immensely buffing its damage by 50% and its crit chance by 50% if you use it before and into. But only do that whenever you have everything else on cooldown and nothing to do but spam thrust, because that does more damage if you know, than thrust alone. So just always watch for your finisher sequences that will only align, as I said, the first two and then every fourth or so. And otherwise, whenever dramatic flourish is available, make sure that you go thrust, advance, dramatic flourish. And generally, lunge will not be off cooldown then. Every fourth time or so, it will line up. And in that case, always recenter after lunge and apply. I did that just by habit because after the first two finisher sequences, these cooldowns will not synchronize, and you should double tap flick to cancel the animation and fire pot, get it back on cooldown. And that's pretty much it, other than also trying to synchronize if you don't have a timer, like you do with a sea salt blade, salt sea blade rather, along with lunge and recenter, like after each one. Then you want to do the same with marked foes after each dramatic flourish, because both have 20-second cooldowns. And that's just a way, especially whenever you're getting the hang of all of this, of ensuring that the big buffs and debuffs from them don't fall off. As I said before, use Northwind on cooldown, and then as far as your big skills go, your big buffs and debuffs are debuff rather, like part of like the major reasons why you are here, brought to the group more so than anything else, is the West Wind, which is actually more powerful than the Red Captain's version of the same skill. It applies to the raid 15% damage to everyone within 10 meters of you for 20 seconds, which is the same duration as both these, um, for the record, and 5 seconds longer than Oathys. Anyway, called the Banners of War, 25% damage to everyone, and they don't have to necessarily be within 10 meters of you, for 15 seconds. And it has a longer cooldown, but you won't always synchronize these together. But initially, especially if you're in a 6-person group and you don't have a red captain, or if you're in a raid and for some reason you're the only DPS buffer, no red captain, no blue lore master, then you want to synchronize these as much as possible into your biggest skill as far as offensive utility goes. Breaking of Thingordrum. For 20 seconds, it applies to one target plus 25% incoming damage debuff, and then to all enemies within 10 meters of it, 10% incoming damage for 15 seconds. And you want to maximize damage during that period by utilizing your finisher sequence after it. I mean, as well as, keep up your debuffs, but don't use anything that is unnecessary, like don't use an extra salt sea blade if, aggressive, you haven't used aggressive strike yet, just have some sense about it. And so keep in mind that the single target damage from this, or debuff the incoming damage, is 20 seconds, and if you are running with a red captain in a raid, generally, in most situations, at least, especially single target, they are going to use both these, or their Oathies first, because it is 35% incoming damage to one target for 15 seconds, which is the exact duration of your Banners of War, and your West Wind is 5 seconds longer than that. So you should use your West Wind, which is more powerful than their version of it, that it does not sack with, of the same buff, which only gives 15% damage to them and their blade brother. You should use yours first. Yours takes priority. And your banner takes priority because you want to use it exactly when they use Oathies, because they both last 15 seconds. And then, whenever, generally, especially if you have Call to Greatness and you're planning to use it as early as possible to get what's called an extended burn phase in, which we will link to a video where I cover this very extensively about offensive synergies. And if there is another enemy within 10 meters of the one that Oathies was used on, because you cannot use both these on the same target and have it be effective for another 90 seconds. You can't use these bothies or crothies, as it's called, murder of crows, blue lore master's big debuff. But you can, once Oaths expires, and I'm just going to cover this briefly, use on a target within 10 meters of it, both these, and not only will that target for 20 seconds get a plus 25% incoming damage debuff, but the priority target and all the rest will, within 10 meters, for 15 seconds, will get a plus 10% incoming damage debuff. And at that point, the captain should use their banner because yours just expired. However, they won't be able to use their two arms because of something that you'll see whenever its effect expires here. It is also worth noting that, actually, I'll wait until to show you. Okay, exhaustion, which is different than exhausted, which is the 2-minute period after Call to Greatness is used, where if you use it another Call to Greatness, it has no effect. Exhaustion, after the effect of two arms, West Wind, and Blue Lore Master's version of the skill expires, then for 25 seconds more, you can't use another one. That's not the case though with Banner. As soon as Banners expires, which if you time it with Oaths, and then you use both these, it should be expired, and it won't overlap with Standard of War, which is Red Captains. But if they use their Standard of War with your Bothies, then you get 30 seconds of an extended burn phase. And generally, Call to Greatness is used like right after that to reset all of the big skills, and it depends on the length of the fight and etc. But obviously, these three skills, if you are the only DPS support, have different cooldowns. And keep in mind that Lunge, every time you use it, reduces all shanty cooldowns by 3 seconds, and they are all shanties. So is the North Wind, as I mentioned before, and Guided by the Stars, and Motivating Song. But yeah, their cooldowns are actually shorter than, assuming you're using Lunge every 15 seconds, or at least very close to it, which you should be. Their cooldowns are shorter, but they won't align very often. And often you'll want to save them to make them align if there is an important window of, like, especially if Call to Greatness is coming and like you know it, but both these is, has a long cooldown still. But these two are available. You want to hold them until Call to Greatness. Well, and then you want to use, assuming that Oaths is used after Call to Greatness, you want to use Banner's War with it, and Westwind, well, Westwind right before Call to Greatness, so to speak, if you can time it that way. Westwind, Banner's of War, and then, as I said, but if you're by yourself, without a Red Captain or Blue Lore Master, then only try to sequence them whenever, like, it's imperative that you truly optimize first. If, like, boss is vulnerable for a particular amount of time, extra vulnerable, that is, to damage, especially 20 seconds or fewer, then try to save them. Otherwise, pretty much use them on cooldown, or when, and I recommend, finally, that you get a tracker of some sort for not only your Westwind and Banners, but for the captains and for the exhaustion effect. So I know whenever I see Standard of War, tick down to 0, that I can hit my banner. And I know whenever I see exhaustion, exactly how long before I can use my west wind. And if you're not coordinating like that, then you're going to underutilize those skills. And, those are immensely powerful buffs to the raid that last a long time. And so make sure to properly, especially in raid with another DPS support, coordinate well and see the video where I go into great length about how to do that in various situations. All right, next we are going to get into the one of the nitty-gritty, nuanced elements of being a, a, a truly elite blue mare. As we just covered, your damage rotation is simple and easy. That does not, like, mastering it does not make you a good blue mariner. A whole lot more goes into separating the good ones from the great ones, from the absolute best. And among them is your speed utilization of your run speed. Because, as I mentioned before, you should be the center of the group. Like, you should get to the next target before everyone else does. And as I've mentioned in many, many videos and will continue to, it is very, very vital. It's like a top 5 rule in group play in this game that, excluding the tank, of course, unless the mechanics of a fight demand that otherwise, that everyone stacks as tightly as possible, as much as possible, and moves together, but you want to lead the charge, so to speak. And you have the ability, especially if you are spec'd into 3 points, especially into Southwind, you have the ability to increase everyone's movement speed even more than make haste from the captain. Even although it doesn't last that long, it's still 13 seconds, and with the 3 points into this, it's for everyone within 10 meters of you, which is important to note. It becomes a 35% run speed boost, which is, incredibly powerful. But you don't need to be spec'd into that to still be the fastest of any class, any spec, etc. As far as getting to the next position and getting your mitigation shred and etc. all, you know, up, and everybody following you and coming to stack on you. And the most efficient way to increase your run speed is going dodge, disengage, on guard, and then you are at 60 or 55% run speed rather, um, like during that time. And so you can just immediately zoom to the next spot and everybody can follow you. And as long as you wait until they reach you to use any skill that, like dramatic flourish, for instance, you know, until everybody is stacked up, as long as you wait until they reach you, as soon as they do, you can immediately hit them with, you know, like thrust, wait, not thrusts. You can immediately hit them with a variety of big buffs, and you can also get while you're on the move, you can use Northwind, Fire Pot, and if you get lucky with rummage, I did it again, knife from range. That's very, very rare. Like I said, only a 1 in 5 chance of getting knife. Like the other, um, like if you really want to, you can use the other skills that rummage will give you. Like this one is not a bad one if it's an attrition fight and groups taking a lot of damage, but And then this is just for soloing basically, but still not really useful. And then got another knife. Anyway, so you should, if they're on off cooldown, then you should use, okay, and then there's an AoE stun, but it's only got 7.2 meter range, so you have to be pretty close for that. And then there's a self heal as well. That is probably the second most useful of the 5 rummage possibilities. Anyway, so I should have mentioned at the beginning, I think I may have, if you're running into a fight from range and not able to start in melee, start with North Wind, Fire Pot, and rummage for knife. Wow. Am I if I had
Yours
this
is
type of
on
luck in
tonight.
a real fight, if I had this type of luck in a real fight or a real farce, like, oh my god. Look at this. This is
Oh, that's
crazy.
insane.
Okay. Okay, this has never happened. Anyway, you want to like as soon as it's almost time to move, especially because you're for the most part melee and you want to like be the center of the group. You want to get there first and make sure that they get to you and on you. Dodge and start running, disengage, and recent or on guard, and then thrust once you get there. Looping advance, get your mid shred, thrust because on guard increases thrust damage, doubles it, and sweeping advance because thrust and sweeping advance is so much damage. You should be able to use Salt Sea Blade on the new target before everyone else is attacking it, pretty much, as well as Mark Foes, most likely. And if you have, so that's a total of a 55% run speed boost. And then with the 35% from 3 points into Southwind, which for some fights like Umshara, boss 3 of DMK, for instance, where you're having to run as quickly as possible from target to target to the boss, etc. You should definitely spec into that. And that brings you to 90% in combat run speed. In addition to whenever you use disengage, it applies a damage buff and buff to the rate of damage as well. And I mean, like, and using on guard gives you a 15-second plus 3% melee crit chance. So why wouldn't you use it when you're on the move? And so, like, it's really important that not only do you get there first and get your mid shreds and dots and etc. up, but that you get into enough of a force state to where as soon as the group arrives, you can use your finisher sequence and buff them and you know proceed.
What I would like to add to that is if you're on your Mariner and you're playing with a new group, a lot of times you will find that range DPS won't realize the benefit to standing on top of you. And you have
You
to
should yell
realize, yeah,
that.
you need to tell them that. You need to communicate because Mariner is such a new class. A lot of people haven't necessarily played with a Mariner before, so they won't know. But like Dramatic Flourish, right? It has a 4-meter range, which is pretty much the size of a tile. So unless they're standing on top of you, they're not getting that extra percentage damage. And that's just one of your skills.
Well, they do get the damage buff from it, but not
But
the
the
incredible crit chance,
yeah,
25% buff.
it
Like,
mhm.
yeah.
So it's so important for you to communicate with them and let them know, like, look, they have to be standing on top of you, or they're not going to be getting any of these benefits, and they're going to be sacrificing their own DPS if they do so. So you're going to have to take that upon yourself to communicate that with them. But it is so important for you to position correctly with respect to the boss that you're fighting. And on top of that, make sure that your team is grouped up on top of you. You got to think of yourself as being like the eye of the storm. Okay, that everything needs to happen around where you're standing, or they're not going to get those buffs.
Guided by the stars, you see effect applied to the raid within 50 meters, plus 15% single target healing crit chance. Cool. Plus 25% incoming healing modifier. Substantial. But plus 50% crit defense literally negates all, as long as the tanks have adequate crit defense. And even if they don't, it literally makes crits do the same amount of damage as normal hits under almost all circumstances. And then it gives a whole lot of finesse to, I don't really understand the purpose of that, but it's something. And with the tracery of Star Guidance duration, it lasts 30.5 seconds. It's powerful to be used enough to be used by itself without any other group defensives, or it alone will allow everybody to stay up for especially that 15 seconds so much more easily. This is generally the first one that's used of the big defensive group skills, but there are fights where huge damage comes later, and this needs to be saved because of just how potent it is. Corruption removal, sequencing based on a variety of factors differently. But so you have, if you are spec, 2 points and 2 cleansing salts in blue, 100% chance to increase a target's incoming damage when removing a corruption. And wait, yeah, if you have the tracery, finisher skills reset salt cure, then not only does your corruption removal salt cure, whenever you remove corruption from the target, it has a base duration for each corruption removed of 25 seconds of a debuff of 2.5% incoming damage. And that stacks. And then if you have that finisher skills reset salt cure, incoming damage debuff duration Tracy, it's not, I mean, the 4.4 seconds is nice, but what it allows you to do is when there are multiple corruptions or multiple tiers or stacks of the same corruption on an enemy that should be removed. And this is another thing that you really need to tell people about. Like, if you have a mariner in the group and there's a corruption that needs to be removed immediately, or even two, let them take care of it. If there are three or more that need to be removed immediately, or really bad things will happen, then maybe one other person should be assigned to take care of one of them. You should go Salt Cure, Dramatic Flourish, Salt Cure, Lunge, and if there's a fourth, then remember, Disengage is a finisher. So Salt Cure, Dodge, Disengage, and then Salt Cure again. You can remove up to 4 in less than 5 seconds and get that immense incoming damage, very long debuff going. There are, as I mentioned, contingencies. Like, you don't necessarily want to use your finishers, your damaging ones, unnecessarily. So if there are like 2 corruptions that are up and it's not imperative to remove both of them as quickly as possible, then you want to go Salt Cure, Dodge, Disengage, Salt Cure, and then save your finisher sequence. If, for instance, there are 3 corruptions that appear and your finishers are up, like are available, or if you know when like 3 corruptions are going to come, roughly, then save your finishers and the skills that enhance them, or when that comes, as long as they don't need to be removed immediately, in which case, still save your finishers. But if they don't need to be removed immediately, then you can go Salt Cure, Thrust, Sweeping Advance, Dramatic Flourish, Salt Cure, Thrust, Compound Attack, Lunge, Salt Cure, Dodge, Disengage, Salt Cure, Recenter. And there, 4 corruptions removed plus 10% incoming damage for half a minute. And if other people are not aware of, and you still did your finisher sequence, like if other people are not aware and are hitting their corruption removals, especially if guardians are spamming Sting, it's maddening because this is such a potent, like corruptions are not as much of a thing or at 150 and 150 content as in previous level caps, but I can virtually guarantee you they will be a much bigger factor once again in group content and at 160 than they have been for most of 150. And it is imperative that everyone understands that it's your job to remove corruptions unless there are too many for you to be able to remove quickly enough to prevent a wipe. Too many that are too powerful. So, corruptions are your responsibility, and this is another thing to yell at people about if they are spamming their corruption removals, because there is literally no class that benefit that does enough damage with their corruption removal to warrant having it being used anywhere close to yours. All right, and finally, going to get to utility skills. And as I mentioned before, you don't have any self heals. You don't have any heals at all. But your shanties do provide a small heal to the group. If you're using the tracery shanty healing skills, that increases the potency by 22%. And if you want, you can spec into even up to 5 points into Hardening Songs, increasing by 30% more. But of your shanties, Motivating Song is by far the most powerful heal. It's not just a buff that should be used. Like, it is a big heal to the group and has virtually no animation and is way underutilized. You've got Toss a Bottle, which, as I mentioned before, is a targeted skill. So target whom you are trying to heal yourself with it. And that's it, unless you get, it's not going to give me the, I got a billion knives, but it's not going to give me the self heal. And then there's the setback into disengage heal, but you have to be really aft for that one to work, and that's not ever really going to, it shouldn't be the situation, at least. Your cleanse is targeted, yeah, and so you need to, if you want to cleanse yourself, select yourself, and it has a long animation, so that may be another consideration for the use of flick. And then you have a skill that is so underutilized and so valuable, even though it has a long cooldown. Smoking stones. You, as long as you're within 7.2 meters, it does not matter like what you're targeting, as long as whatever is inducting that you want to interrupt, yellow bar, of course, or green bar. I'm colorblind, so whatever. Not gray bar inductions, but you know, normal interruptible inductions. It's an AoE interrupt where you don't actually have to target the mob inducting and use your interrupt to stop it. You can just hit this skill once every minute, and as long as the target that you are on as long as the inducting enemy is within 7 meter radius of them, enemy slash enemies, you can just use this, and it has a pretty long induction. Once again, another potential use for Flick to make sure that you beat that induction from completing. But all of them will get interrupted, and you don't have to be like, if say you have a bad camera angle, especially you're not, or you're a you click your skills, and so you're not able to target very effectively. And it's a fast induction, and several of them that are going off, or even just one. But you're not confident that you'll be able to target the mob and get the interrupt in time, or you see that that really important induction is about to go off, you can just, without changing targets, waiting for it to come back up to show you how quickly you can, if you have flick available, you can just use it. Need a target rather to use. You need a target to use flick. Duh. But anyway, you can use it and immediately interrupt all of the inductions. However, you do have to be relatively close, and they all have to be relatively bunched up.
I think double tapping smoking stones is very important because I've been in multiple situations where I go to hit the skill and it doesn't cast fast enough for the interrupt to be interrupted. So knowing how to double tap and get that off really fast is a vital skill to
It's quite
practice.
ironic because single target interrupts for every class are immediate skills.
Yeah,
Uh, but
but
like
not smoking stones.
you're using your immediate interrupt to
Interrupt your AoE.
make your AOE interrupt
Yeah,
immediate.
yeah.
So
But yeah,
like
it's important to know
that.
timing wise to do that because otherwise you might be throwing it and it'll actually take longer to go off than the actual interrupt that you're trying to interrupt.
Mhm. One other use that I found very important for flick potentially is toss a bottle. Like I recommend having a key binding to target yourself, but toss a bottle has a longer cooldown than most self heals. However, I didn't target, but you get the point. It would have been
Mhm,
immediate
mhm.
if I had anyway. You target, well, you can't target yourself and an enemy, but you can like just target or turn off target forwarding or target yourself. You toss a bottle, click tab, and then double tap, and still it will save at least half a second and can potentially save your life. And if the tank is about to die and you really need to save him or her, and then, toss a bottle, interrupting with flick is a very good idea, especially when you combine with
Motivating song.
moving
Mhm.
on. And so looks like I'd say the other primary use for flick is, even though step back's induction or animation is pretty quick, as I mentioned before, moving song into step back is the safest way to out recentering to avoid stumbling forward. So bam. And in like 0.3 seconds, you're safe. Beyond that, salt cure, actually, you can consider, especially if you're not going to use dramatic flourish or lunge, like if you're gonna want to remove two corruptions but save your finishers, but remove them as fast as possible, then salt cure, flick into dodge, disengage, salt cure. All right, so I think that pretty much covers it. Remember, in real fights, especially in group fights, always have steady aft toggled, and whenever you get stunned, or if it's by through your own like stumbling forward, or by anything else, anytime that you get immobilized, this toggles off. So make sure to retoggle it.
Thank you everyone for watching, and as always, happy hunting.